It was one of those quiet weekends when everything just felt right. The sun was warm but not too hot, and a soft breeze was coming off the water. I had no plans other than to relax, maybe catch a few fish and enjoy the calm that came with living near the small lake behind my home. I'd always loved that lake. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful, clear water, surrounded by tall trees and just far enough from the road that you could forget the rest of the world for a while. When I bought the house years ago, that little lake was the reason I chose this place. It was mentioned right there in the property papers, part of the land, deeded to the property itself. To me, it wasn't just a lake. It was a piece of peace that came with all the long days I worked for. So that Saturday afternoon, I decided to take my old fishing rod, a small folding chair and a cold drink, and just spend the day down by the water. I walked through the backyard down the short slope that led to the lake. The grass had grown a little taller than usual, but I didn't mind. It made everything look soft and alive. The water shimmered under the sunlight, little ripples moving slowly like the lake itself was breathing. I sat up near the edge, fixed my line, and cast it out. The splash was small and satisfying, the kind that tells you the world is still quiet and no one's in a hurry. For a while, nothing happened. I could hear birds, the faint sound of kids playing somewhere down the street, and that was it. That's the kind of peace you can't buy, you know? I wasn't thinking about work or bills or the long list of small things people usually stress about. I just sat there waiting for a bite, feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then I heard tires on gravel. At first, I didn't think much of it. The road behind the houses sometimes had cars passing through, especially on weekends, but the sound stopped right near my yard. When I turned around, I saw a white SUV with a shiny HOA logo on the door. I recognized it immediately. Our homeowners association, or as many of us quietly called it, the neighborhood patrol. Out stepped the HOA president herself. She was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon, and wearing sunglasses even though the sun had started to dip behind the trees. She looked at me the way someone might look at a kid caught sneaking candy from a store. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the air. "You can't fish there." I turned around, a little confused but still calm. "I live here," I said. "This is my lake." She shook her head like I had just told her the sky was green. "No, this is HOA property," she said firmly. "That lake is for residents to look at, not to fish in. It's part of our community space." I blinked. "Ma'am," I said as politely as I could, "this isn't HOA property. It's on my deed. It came with my house. I've got the papers to prove it." She laughed. Not the friendly kind of laugh, but that sharp, dismissive one people use when they think they're right and you're wasting their time. "I've been president for 8 years, she said. "I know every inch of this neighborhood. That lake belongs to the association. You're technically trespassing." I didn't even know what to say at first. I'd lived there for over 6 years, and not once had anyone told me I couldn't fish in the lake. In fact, I'd fished there plenty of times before and nobody had ever said a word. "Look," I said after a moment, "maybe there's a misunderstanding, but the lake's on my property line. It's private. It's not shared space." She crossed her arms. "That's not what our records show." Then, before I could say another word, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said. I honestly thought she was bluffing. I stood there watching her make the call, trying not to laugh at how ridiculous it all felt. But she wasn't joking. Within 5 minutes, I saw flashing blue and red lights down the road. 2 officers got out of their car, walking toward us with that careful, neutral look they have when they don't yet know what they're walking into. The first officer nodded to me. "Afternoon, sir. We got a call about someone trespassing on private property." I gestured toward the lake. "That's my property," I said calmly. "I live right there. The lake's part of my land. She's mistaken." The officer looked between us. "You own this section of land?" "Yes," I said. "It's in my deed. I can show you the documents." Before I could go get them, the HOA president jumped in. "That's not true," she insisted. "The HOA maintains this lake. It's part of the community's property. He doesn't have the right to fish here." The officer sighed, clearly realizing this wasn't going to be a quick call. "Okay," he said, keeping his tone even. "Do you have proof of ownership?" I nodded. "Inside the house. I can grab the deed." He motioned for me to go ahead, so I walked up to the house, the other officer standing nearby just to make sure everything stayed civil. When I came back, I handed over the folder that had the survey and deed information. It clearly showed that the lake, or at least about 90% of it, was within my property boundary. The officer looked it over for a minute, then handed it back. "It looks like you do own this land," he said, "but the HOA president wasn't having it." "That's an old map," she said quickly. "The association updated the boundaries years ago. He's not supposed to be down here." The officer gave her a polite but tired smile. "Ma'am, property boundaries can't just be updated without county approval. From what I see, he's not breaking any laws." She glared at him, then at me. "We'll see about that," she muttered. "This isn't over." The officers finished their conversation with me, basically saying that it was a civil issue, not a criminal one. They suggested that if she had a dispute about property ownership, she should take it up with the county, not the police. Then they left, and she stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door hard enough that it echoed across the water. For a moment, I just stood there, the sound of the engine fading as she drove away. I should have been angry, but honestly, I was more confused than anything else. How could someone just decide that a lake on my deed suddenly belonged to the HOA? I sat back down in my chair and looked out at the water. My fishing line was still floating, untouched. The sun had dipped low now, casting long orange reflections across the surface. I reeled it in slowly, thinking about how something so peaceful had just turned into a small neighborhood showdown. When I went back inside, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I pulled out my old home purchase folder, the one with every paper, every survey, every legal description. The more I looked, the clearer it became. I was right. The lake and several feet of the land around it were legally mine. The HOA had no claim on it. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. If she was bold enough to call the police over something like this, what else had the HOA been doing behind the scenes? I didn't want trouble, but I also didn't want anyone trying to take something I owned. That night, I talked to a couple of neighbors over text. One of them, who had lived there longer than I had, told me that the HOA had started to get more aggressive lately, adding new rules, charging small maintenance fees for things nobody really saw getting maintained. He said a few people had already complained, but most just didn't want to stir the pot. I realized I might have accidentally stirred it for them. Still, I didn't regret it. All I had done was fish in my own lake. That wasn't a crime. That was supposed to be one of the joys of living where I did. The next morning, I went outside again. The air was crisp and the lake was completely still. For a second, I thought about grabbing my fishing rod again, but I decided against it. Not because I was scared, but because I knew if the HOA president saw me, she'd be back with another complaint. I figured I'd give it a day or two to cool off. I took a walk around instead, looking at the edges of the property, following the markers that showed where my land ended. The lake sat right in the center of my plot, no question about it. But something odd caught my eye. A small sign near one side of the lake that hadn't been there before. It said HOA property, no trespassing. I stared at it for a good minute, wondering if I was seeing things. But no, it was real. A metal post, freshly planted, the sign clearly knew. I shook my head and laughed under my breath. They'd put up a sign on my land. It was almost funny if it hadn't been so ridiculous. I took a photo of it, mostly for my own records, and went back inside. I wasn't sure what my next step should be, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. Something told me that the HOA had been crossing more lines than just this one. And if they were willing to call the cops on a homeowner for being on his own property, then who knew what else they'd been doing? That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset reflect off the water. The lake was calm again, but it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel like my peaceful little escape anymore. Now it felt like the start of something bigger, something that was about to uncover a lot more than anyone in the neighborhood expected. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call the HOA president made had started a chain of events that would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. At that moment, I just wanted things to go back to normal. But deep down, I could feel it. Things were only just getting started. The next few days after the whole fishing incident were strange. It was like something had shifted in the air. I didn't see the HOA president again, but I could feel her presence everywhere. Maybe it was just my imagination, but people seemed to glance a little longer when I drove through the neighborhood. A few waved like nothing was wrong, but others just gave that cautious half-smile people use when they're not sure if they should take a side. I kept to myself. I went to work, came home, Did my usual chores, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. It wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about the idea that someone could just decide they owned something that clearly wasn't theirs, and call the police over it. That sign they put up still stood by the lake. Every morning, I'd see it from my kitchen window. It looked wrong there, like a scar on something peaceful. I thought about taking it down, but I decided to leave it for now. I wanted proof. I had already taken photos, but I knew something told me I might need more than that. A few nights later, I was taking the trash out when I saw lights near the lake again. Flashlights moving slowly along the waterline. I squinted and could make out a few figures, 2 men and 1 woman, checking something near the edge. I walked closer, keeping a polite distance, and called out, "Everything okay down there?" One of them turned around. "HO inspection," he said shortly. "At this hour?" I asked. He didn't answer. The woman, who I recognized as one of the board members, gave me a tight smile. "Just routine maintenance," she said. Nothing to worry about. I knew that was a lie. No one did maintenance at 10 at night with flashlights and clipboards. But I didn't push it. I went back inside, locked the door, and wrote down the time and date. Something about the whole thing felt off. The next morning, I found out why. There was another letter taped to my door. It was from the HOA. The tone was cold and formal. It said I had violated community property rules by engaging in activities not permitted in shared spaces. It also mentioned unauthorized signs or structures on HOA land. That last part made me laugh. They were accusing me of putting up an unauthorized sign, the same one they had installed. I was angry, but more than that, I was tired. Tired of feeling like I had to defend myself for simply using what I rightfully owned. So I decided it was time to stop reacting and start doing something about it. That afternoon, I drove down to the county records office. It was an old building with faded paint and flickering lights, the kind of place where you could smell the paper and dust from a mile away. A clerk sat behind the counter looking like she'd seen every type of frustrated homeowner there was. "Hi," I said. "I need to check the property records for my address. Specifically, I want to verify boundary lines and ownership of a lake that's on the land." She nodded like this wasn't the first time someone had asked that. "Got your parcel number?" "Yep." I handed it to her. She typed it into her computer and scrolled for a while. Then she printed out a few sheets and handed them to me. "Here you go. That's the most recent official record. The lake's part of your lot." Just to be sure, I asked, "Has there been any change to that recently?" She checked again. There's something here. Looks like a boundary adjustment was filed by the HOA about 8 months ago, but it was never approved. The county rejected it for missing documentation." I leaned forward. "Rejected?" "Yeah," she said. "They didn't have the proper signatures from all affected property owners. Happens a lot. Sometimes HOAs try to file these to claim common space or ponds. But until the county signs off, it's not official." I felt my chest tighten, not with fear but with confirmation. That's what this was all about. They had tried to make the lake part of their property, failed, and decided to act like it was theirs anyway. I thanked the clerk and left with copies of the papers. The sun felt different when I walked out of that office, and, like the truth had some weight to it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. They were the ones crossing the line. On my way home, I stopped at a small law office I'd passed a few times before. It wasn't fancy, just a modest building with a wooden sign and a single name on the door. Inside, a middle-aged attorney sat surrounded by stacks of folders. He looked up as I walked in. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I need some advice about my homeowners association. They're trying to claim property that's part of my deed." He nodded slowly, motioning for me to sit. I explained everything. The fishing, the police, the sign, the inspection, the letter, and now what I'd found at the records office. He listened carefully, taking notes as I talked. When I finished, he leaned back. "You did the right thing by checking the county records," he said. "That's solid proof. If the HOA's acting like they own land that isn't theirs, that's a serious issue. It's not just overreach, it could be considered misrepresentation." "What can I do about it?" I asked. "For now, keep everything," he said. "Every letter, every photo, every note. Don't remove that sign. Don't confront them directly. I'll send a formal notice to their board requesting they stop trespassing and remove any property placed on your land. If they don't, we can escalate." I left the office feeling more confident. It wasn't over, but at least I had someone on my side now. That night, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet. A few neighbors were out too, walking dogs or watering plants. One of them, an older man who lived a few houses down, stopped me. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "Heard about what happened with the lake?" I nodded. "Yeah, it got a little out of hand." He shook his head. "A little? They called the cops on you. That's not normal. You're not the first person they've messed with either. Last year they tried to fine me for having my truck parked in my own driveway. Said it looked commercial." I raised my eyebrows. "What did you do?" "Ignored them," he said. "They backed off eventually. Most people just don't want to fight. The HOA counts on that. That stuck with me. They count on people not fighting back." Over the next few days, I noticed small changes. The HOA truck that usually drove around once a week was suddenly passing by my house almost every day. Sometimes they stopped at the corner just sitting there. Other times they slowed down by the lake, pretending to check something. It wasn't hard to see what they were doing, trying to make me uncomfortable, maybe get me to back down. But I didn't. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every visit, every note, every strange thing that happened. I even set up a small camera near the back window pointing toward the lake. I didn't plan to use it for anything dramatic. I just wanted to have proof in case something went missing or they tried to twist the story. A week later, I got another letter, this one thicker than the first. It wasn't just a warning this time. It was a fine. The HOA claimed I owed $500 for violating community property regulations and unauthorized use of HOA land. That was the final straw. I called the attorney, who told me not to pay a cent. "That fine's invalid," he said. "They can't enforce it for land they don't legally control. Let me handle it." He drafted a response and sent it to them. A few days later, I heard back from him. "They're doubling down," he said. "But don't worry, they're making a mess for themselves." Meanwhile, life around the neighborhood started to shift. People who used to wave politely were now asking questions. "What's really going on with the lake? Did they really call the cops on you? I thought that was your land?" It seemed like the HOA's story wasn't holding up anymore. Some of my neighbors started looking into their own property records, and a few found small discrepancies in what the HOA had told them too. Then one morning, something happened that confirmed everything I suspected. I woke up to the sound of digging. Not loud, but steady, the rhythmic clank of metal on dirt. I went outside and saw two workers near the lake, putting in small wooden stakes along the shoreline. I asked what they were doing. "Marking the new HOA boundary," one said casually. "The new what?" He shrugged. "Got an order from the board to mark it out for future maintenance work." I took a deep breath. "You realize this is private property, right?" "You're on my land," he looked confused. "We were told this belongs to the association." "It doesn't," I said firmly. "You might want to stop before this becomes a legal issue." He hesitated, then nodded and called his supervisor. 10 minutes later, the workers packed up and left. But the stakes they'd planted remained, like little wooden reminders of how far the HOA was willing to push. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers and the deed, the county maps, the HOA letters, and photos of the signs and stakes. It looked like something out of a detective story. I wasn't the kind of person who liked drama, but I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't only about me anymore. It was about what was right. I sent all the documents to the attorney and asked him what the next step should be. He said he was going to prepare a formal notice demanding the HOA cease all interference and retract their claims. If they don't respond properly, he said, we'll take it to the county office and the state HOA oversight board. It felt good to hear that. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a little control again. Later that night, I went outside and stood by the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the moon like a silver mirror. I could still see the faint marks from where the stakes had been, the disturbed soil near the edge. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs. I thought about how something so small, a quiet afternoon of fishing, had turned into this whole mess. But as crazy as it all was, I was glad it had happened, because if it hadn't, I might never have known what the HOA was really doing. The next few days were quiet again. The HOA didn't send anyone. No trucks, no letters. For a while, I thought maybe they'd finally decided to back off. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. People like that don't just walk away when they think they're in control. And I was right. At the next HOA meeting, Something big was about to happen. Something that would take everything I'd learned and bring it right into the open for everyone to see. At that point, I didn't realize it yet, but the lake wasn't the only thing they'd been overstepping on. The truth was much deeper, and once it started coming out, there would be no hiding from it. A week passed before the next HOA meeting. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go at first. Those meetings were usually filled with people arguing about mailbox paint or parking rules. But this time things were different. I had proof that the HOA had crossed the line, and I knew this was the moment to bring it out into the open. The meeting was being held in the small community clubhouse near the entrance of the neighborhood. When I walked in, the room was already half full. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the familiar HOA logo hung on a banner at the front. The president sat behind a table, her expression unreadable, shuffling through papers as people took their seats. A few neighbors nodded at me when I walked in. Some looked curious, others cautious. The tension in the air was thick, the kind that made everyone whisper but no one say what they were really thinking. I sat near the back at first, listening quietly. They went through the usual stuff: landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, neighborhood watch updates. It was routine, the kind of thing most people didn't pay much attention to. But then, about 20 minutes in, the president cleared her throat. "Next," she said, glancing down at her paper, "we have an issue regarding property access around the community lake." The room grew quieter. Everyone knew what she was talking about. She continued, "It's come to our attention that a resident has been using HOA-managed land for personal activities without approval. We're in the process of reviewing this situation and working with local authorities to ensure our property boundaries are respected." That was my cue. I stood up. "That resident would be me," I said. All heads turned. Some people looked surprised. Others just looked tired of the drama. "I'd like to say something," I continued, keeping my voice calm. The president sighed. "Sir, this isn't the time for—" "It is," I said firmly but not aggressively, "because I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." There was a pause. A few people murmured for me to go ahead, so she reluctantly leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. I walked up to the front and set a stack of papers on the table. "This," I said, "is my property deed. And this," I added, holding up another sheet, "is a certified copy of the county survey map. Both clearly show that the lake behind my house, the same one I was fishing in, is part of my private property. It's not and never has been HOA land." A few gasps went through the room. Someone in the back said quietly, "Wait, what?" The president's face tightened. "That's not accurate," she said quickly. "We filed a revised boundary with the county." I nodded. "You did, but it was rejected. I checked with the county clerk myself. You didn't have the legal authority or signatures from the property owners. You filed it anyway and then acted like it was official." Now the murmurs grew louder. People started whispering to each other, flipping through their own HOA letters. One man stood up. "Is that true? Did you file something with the county without approval?" The president hesitated. We followed standard procedure," she said. "There may have been some miscommunication." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "You called the police on me," I said, "for fishing in my own lake. You posted a no trespassing sign on my land. You fined me $500 for being on property I legally own. That's not miscommunication. That's overstepping." A woman near the front spoke up, her tone nervous but curious. "If that's true, then what about all the lake maintenance fees we've been paying every year?" That question hit the room like a spark. Everyone started talking at once. People were flipping through their HOA notices, pulling out their phones, checking emails and documents. The president tried to talk over them, insisting that the fees were for general upkeep, but no one was really listening to her anymore. After a few minutes, one of the board members, a quiet man who rarely spoke, leaned into the microphone. "Maybe we should take a break," he said softly. The president glared at him but didn't argue. She announced a short recess and walked outside with a few others, whispering urgently. I stayed inside. A few neighbors came up to me asking to see the papers. I showed them the deed and the county survey. They passed them around, shaking their heads. "This is ridiculous," one of them said. "We've been paying for lake maintenance for years. If the HOA doesn't own it, where's all that money going?" That was the question I'd been wondering myself. When the meeting resumed, the president came back looking flustered. Her voice was tighter, her usual confidence replaced by forced calm. "We appreciate everyone's input," she said. "We'll be reviewing this matter internally with our legal advisor. For now, I ask that we maintain order and not jump to conclusions." But it was too late for that. The room had already turned. After the meeting ended, a small group of homeowners gathered around me outside. They wanted to know more about the boundary filing, the police call, everything. I told them what I knew and promised to share any updates once my lawyer followed up. That night, I got home feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I hadn't gone there to start a war. I just wanted the truth out in the open. But once people saw how deep the problem went, it was like something had cracked wide open. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen messages on my phone. Neighbors were sending me photos of HOA letters they'd received over the years, all mentioning various fees and maintenance costs related to community property. Some of those fees didn't make any sense. One person even found that they'd been charged for late cleanup last summer, even though no one had seen any work being done. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He called later that day, sounding almost amused. "You may have stumbled onto something big," he said. "If they've been collecting fees for property they don't own, that's not just overreach. That's potentially fraud." Fraud. That word hit hard. He said he'd start drafting a formal complaint to the county and the state's Homeowners Association Regulatory Office. "Keep documenting," he told me. "Every message, every piece of paper. Don't engage with them directly anymore. Let's do this by the book." So that's what I did. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was buzzing. It was like the whole story had spread overnight. People who'd never paid attention to HOA politics were suddenly talking about it during morning walks or at the mailbox. Everyone had a story, small things they'd brushed off before but now looked suspicious. One neighbor told me the HOA had reclassified a patch of land behind his house last year and started charging him for shared lawn maintenance. Another said they'd been billed for security, lights that had never been installed. It was all starting to connect. A few days later, I got another envelope from the HOA, but this one wasn't a fine or warning. It was an official statement addressed to all residents. It claimed that there had been a clerical misunderstanding regarding property lines, and that they were reviewing all financial records to ensure transparency. It sounded professional, but it was clearly damage control. My lawyer sent me a copy of the complaint he'd filed. It was long and detailed with all the attached documents. The rejected boundary filing, the false fines, the photos, the letters, everything. It felt good to see it all neatly laid out, the truth in black and white. But not everyone was happy. A few days later, I noticed that same white HOA SUV parked at the corner of my street again. It didn't move for nearly half an hour. I could see someone inside, probably taking notes. I decided to walk out and check my mail, just to make it clear I saw them. The SUV started up and drove off slowly. It was getting strange again. Then one morning I found something new taped to my door. It wasn't from the HOA, at least not officially. It was handwritten on plain paper. "Stop stirring up trouble," it said. "You're making things worse for everyone." I stood there for a long time, reading it over and over. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it carried a tone that made my stomach twist. I showed it to my lawyer, who told me to keep it. "We might need that later," he said. Despite everything, I tried to keep living normally. I went to work, mowed the lawn, waved to neighbors. But the situation had clearly changed the way people looked at me. Some thanked me quietly for standing up to the HOA. Others avoided me entirely, afraid of being dragged into the mess. Then, about a week later, the county finally responded to my lawyer's complaint. The investigator confirmed what we already knew. The HOA had filed an unapproved boundary change, used it to justify collecting fees, and misrepresented ownership in several public documents. The investigator also mentioned something else. "This isn't the first complaint we've received about this HOA." That was both reassuring and concerning. It meant they had a history of this kind of behavior. The following Saturday, the county posted a notice at the entrance of the neighborhood announcing an audit of the HOA's financial and property records. For a few days, things went completely silent. No more letters, no trucks, no late-night inspections. It was like the entire board had gone underground. When I walked by the lake that evening, the no trespassing sign was gone, just a patch of disturbed dirt where it had been. I stood there for a long time, looking out over the water. The surface was smooth again, reflecting the last bit of daylight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a real sense of calm. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet. The audit would take time. The HOA would have to answer for what they'd done, and I had no doubt they'd try to twist things in their favor. Still, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had truth on my side, and the support of neighbors who now understood what had been going on all along. That small act of fishing in my own lake had turned into something much bigger than I ever expected. It wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about standing up when people in power think they can do whatever they want. And as quiet as the neighborhood seemed that night, I had a feeling that what was coming next would be even bigger, and it would finally reveal just how deep the HOA's overreach had gone. The week after the county audit notice went up was one of the strangest times the neighborhood had ever seen. Normally, our streets were quiet, with people walking dogs or watering their lawns. Now there was a constant buzz of whispers, small groups talking on driveways, and glances toward the HOA office like it had turned into some kind of mystery scene. No one from the board said a word publicly. The HOA's social media page, which usually posted reminders about pool hours or landscaping tips, went silent. Even the usual patrol SUV that used to drive around twice a day disappeared. For a few days it was almost too quiet. I didn't know if they were regrouping or panicking, but I knew one thing. The truth was finally catching up to them. One morning I woke up to find a county vehicle parked near the clubhouse. 2 people were unloading file boxes and carrying them inside. It didn't take long for word to spread that the auditors had arrived. They were going through years of HOA records. Bank statements, property filings, correspondence, all of it. I watched from a distance, standing on my porch with a cup of coffee. I wasn't trying to be nosy, but after everything that had happened, it was hard not to be curious. It felt like something big was finally happening, something that might make all the stress and frustration worth it. Later that day, one of my neighbors, an older man who'd lived there long before me, came over. He had that look of quiet excitement on his face. "You won't believe what I just heard," he said. "The county's already found some issues. Missing receipts, unexplained transfers. They said the HOA's financial reports don't add up." I nodded slowly. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. "About time someone looked into them," he said. "People have been complaining for years." It turned out that the HOA's lake maintenance fees were just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next week, more information started to trickle through the neighborhood. A few residents who had friends at the county office said there were irregularities in how money was being used. Things like landscaping payments to companies that didn't exist, invoices without signatures, and maintenance budgets that were double what they should have been. No one had solid proof yet, but the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. The president of the HOA, however, was nowhere to be seen. Usually, she was the type to walk around like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, checking for rule violations. But ever since the audit started, she had vanished completely. A week later, the HOA finally sent out a statement. It was short and vague. Something about cooperating fully with the county's review and ensuring financial transparency moving forward. They also announced an emergency meeting to discuss upcoming changes to board leadership. When I read that part, I knew something major was about to happen. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. More people showed up than I'd ever seen before. Homeowners who had skipped every other meeting for years suddenly wanted front row seats. Some were angry, some curious, but everyone wanted answers. The board members looked nervous when they walked in. The president wasn't there. Instead, the vice president, a quiet man who usually just nodded through every vote, stood up to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he began, clearing his throat. "As most of you know, the county has been reviewing our financial records. We've discovered some inconsistencies that we're working hard to resolve." A woman from the audience called out, "You mean fraud?" He hesitated. "There were some accounting errors and miscommunications. The former president has stepped down while we conduct an internal review." That caused an uproar. People started shouting questions all at once, like, "Where did the money go? Who approved those filings? Are we getting refunds?" I didn't say anything. I just sat there watching the board members squirm as they tried to calm the crowd. They kept repeating the same rehearsed lines about working with the county and ensuring proper documentation. After a while, the noise died down enough for me to stand up. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth," I said. "This didn't start with an accounting mistake. It started when the HOA tried to claim private property that didn't belong to them. They filed a fake boundary revision with the county, collected maintenance fees for land they didn't own, and used that as an excuse to fine homeowners. That's not a misunderstanding. That's abuse of power. A few people clapped. Others nodded in agreement. The vice president looked uncomfortable but didn't deny it. "We're aware of those issues," he said slowly. "That's part of what's being reviewed. Then you should also be aware," I continued, "that a lot of us want to know how far this goes. If the board's been mishandling money, we deserve full disclosure." He nodded weakly. "That's fair." The rest of the meeting turned into a storm of complaints, demands, and frustration. People brought up things they'd been holding back for years: unfair fines, unexplained dues increases, ignored maintenance requests. It was like everyone had been waiting for a moment to finally let it out, and now they had one. When the meeting ended, the board promised to send updates once the audit was complete. But no one seemed convinced. Most people left shaking their heads, muttering about how long it had all gone on unnoticed. I stayed behind a little longer, talking with a few neighbors. For the first time since the whole fishing incident started, I didn't feel like I was alone in this. People who barely knew me before were now thanking me for speaking up. Some even apologized for believing the HOA's side at first. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Over the next few days, the changes came fast. The HOA's office door was locked most of the time, and the once busy parking lot stayed empty. Rumors spread that several board members had resigned. The county kept their files sealed while the investigation continued. But everyone could sense something big was about to happen. Then one morning, I got a letter in the mail, not from the HOA but from the county itself. It was a notice stating that the audit had confirmed multiple violations, including improper use of funds and unauthorized property filings. They were ordering the HOA to correct its records, refund collected fees related to the lake, and suspend all fines issued under false property claims. I read that letter 3 times just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. A few hours later, I stepped outside and saw several neighbors gathered near the mailbox area, waving the same letter. People were smiling, laughing, relieved. After months of tension, it finally felt like we'd won. That evening, I went back down to the lake. The water was calm again, the surface smooth and golden under the sunset. The last of the wooden stakes had been pulled out, the HOA property sign gone completely. It looked like it did before, peaceful, untouched mine. I cast my fishing line out just like I had that first day. The sound of the water brought back everything that had happened. The yelling, the police, the meetings, the letters. But now it all felt distant, like a bad dream I'd finally woken up from. A couple of neighbors walked by and waved. One of them called out, "Back where you belong, huh?" I smiled. Exactly where I belong. But even though the immediate battle was over, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd learned from it all. How easily a small group of people could take control just because no one was paying attention. How something as simple as fishing in your own backyard could expose years of hidden wrongdoing. The following week, the HOA held another meeting, this time run by a temporary committee the county had assigned to oversee the cleanup. The new members promised more transparency and said they'd start fresh elections soon. They even thanked me publicly for bringing the issue to light. It was awkward being the center of attention, but I appreciated the honesty. Later, as people were leaving, one of the committee members came up to me. "You know," he said, "you did more than just defend your property. You reminded people that these boards work for the homeowners, not the other way around." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded. It was never about being a hero. I just didn't like being lied to. For a while, things in the neighborhood went back to normal. Kids played outside again, neighbors waved more, and the constant tension that had hung over everything slowly faded. The HOA started sending out actual financial reports that made sense, and people finally had a say in how things were run. Every now and then, though, I'd still think about that first day by the lake. If she hadn't called the police on me, none of this might have come out. The whole system might have kept running the same way, quietly taking from people who just wanted peace. Life has a funny way of turning small moments into big ones. What started as a quiet afternoon with a fishing rod had turned into something that changed the neighborhood for good. I didn't see the old president again after she resigned. Word was that she'd moved away, maybe to another town, maybe to start over. I didn't hold any grudge. Everyone makes choices, and sometimes the wrong ones catch up faster than you expect. One evening, months later, I was sitting by the lake again, this time with a couple of neighbors who'd brought their own fishing rods. The sun was setting and the water shimmered like glass. You ever think about how crazy that whole thing was? One of them asked. All the time, I said. Feels like a different life now. He nodded. Well, thanks to you, we actually know where our money's going. That's something. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while. The line tugged and I reeled in a small fish. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory all the same. As I released it back into the water, I looked around at the calm scene, the soft ripples, the trees swaying gently in the wind, the faint hum of crickets in the distance. It was the same lake, the same backyard, the same peace I'd always loved, but it meant more now. It was proof that standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, can actually make a difference. And as the last bit of sunlight disappeared over the water, I realized that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't just protect what's yours, and it protects everyone around you too. The months that followed felt like the first real breath of peace the neighborhood had taken in years. The tension that once hung in the air, those silent stares, that fear of getting a warning letter over the smallest thing, had all but disappeared. For the first time, people actually smiled when they walked past each other. The old bitterness between homeowners and the board faded away. The new committee the county helped form started sending updates every few weeks. They held meetings in open daylight with coffee and snacks instead of those stiff, rule-heavy gatherings where everyone was afraid to speak. It was like watching a place heal. For me, life slowly went back to its old rhythm. I still worked my same job, still enjoyed quiet evenings, and still spent weekends near the lake. Only now, when I sat by the water, I felt a calm pride that hadn't been there before. The lake shimmered under the sun like it always had, peaceful and steady, as if nothing had ever happened. The only difference was that I saw more people down there now, families walking, kids skipping stones, neighbors bringing their chairs to chat by the water. I never minded. That lake had always been meant for peace, not arguments or lines drawn in dirt. It was part of why I'd bought the property in the first place. One afternoon, a man from the county stopped by my house. He was polite, soft-spoken, and carried a folder tucked under his arm. Just wanted to thank you personally, he said. Your report and those documents you shared helped clear up a lot of issues. The HOA wasn't just overstepping property boundaries. They were running things without any proper oversight. What you did helped protect not just your land, but everyone else's rights too. I didn't really know what to say. I wasn't trying to be anyone's savior. I just wanted to fish in peace. He handed me a copy of the county's final statement. It confirmed that the HOA's records had been corrected, all illegal filings removed, and any unauthorized claims nullified. The board was now under temporary supervision until a full election could be held. When he left, I sat on the porch for a long time, the paper in my hand, just letting the moment sink in. It was over. That night I walked down to the lake again. The air was cool, the kind of crispness that comes right before summer starts to fade. The moonlight stretched across the surface of the water like a soft trail of silver. For a while I just stood there, listening to the sounds of the night, the frogs croaking, crickets chirping, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I thought about everything that had happened, the confrontation, the police, the meetings, the late nights going through old papers. It had all started because someone wanted to control what wasn't theirs. But what it became was something much bigger, a reminder that silence lets people like that thrive. A few days later, the new board elections took place. I didn't plan to run for anything, but a few neighbors tried to convince me. You should, one of them said. You actually care about fairness. I laughed it off. I care about my lake. That's enough. In the end, the new board was made up of people who genuinely wanted to fix things. One of them, a kind older woman who'd lived there since the neighborhood was built, came by after the first official meeting. We're refunding everyone for the false lake fees, she said. The checks will go out next week. It's not much, but it's the right thing to do. That small act meant more than any apology ever could. A week later, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. It was plain, no fancy logos, just a folded letter and a check attached. The letter was short and humble. It simply said, "We sincerely apologize for the errors and distress caused by past management. Thank you for your patience and your courage." For the first time in a long while, the words HOA didn't fill me with frustration. Over time, life found its rhythm again. The board started hosting little community events, barbecues by the clubhouse, cleanup days around the trails, even small fishing tournaments for kids. The same lake that had once been a source of conflict became the heart of the neighborhood again. People began to treat each other differently, too. It was subtle but noticeable, more kindness, more understanding. One Saturday morning I was out near the water when I saw a few kids setting up little fishing rods. Their parents were nearby, laughing and chatting. One of the kids waved at me. "Mister, you caught any big ones today?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, smiling. "But I think they're out there hiding." He grinned and said, "I'm going to catch one bigger than yours." "Then I guess we'll see who's luckier," I said, chuckling. Moments like that made everything worth it. A few weeks later, the county sent out a notice saying their supervision of the HOA was complete. The board had met all the new transparency requirements, and they'd officially restored all property lines to their rightful status. It felt like a final chapter closing. But even with all that, something about the whole experience stuck with me. It wasn't just about property or paperwork anymore. It was about what happens when people stop questioning authority. I'd always assumed that rules existed to protect fairness, but now I knew how easily they could be used for control if no one paid attention. The lake taught me that too. It wasn't just water and land. It was a mirror of the neighborhood itself. When it was peaceful, everything around it was too. But when people tried to claim it and control it, everything got murky and hostile. One evening, as the sun was setting, a few of the new board members invited me to the clubhouse for a small gathering. Nothing official, just a thank you dinner. When I walked in, the atmosphere was completely different from the old days. No stiff faces, no tension. Just people laughing, music playing softly, and the smell of grilled food in the air. Someone raised a glass and said, "To the man who just wanted to fish." Everyone laughed. I couldn't help but laugh, too. After dinner, one of the board members asked if I'd ever thought about writing down the story of what happened. "People should know," he said. "It might help others who've gone through something similar." I shrugged. "Maybe one day. Right now, I just want to enjoy the quiet." When I walked home that night, the sky was clear and full of stars, the kind of stillness that only comes when a long fight is finally over. It made me think about how much had changed, not just around me, but inside me too. Before all this, I'd been the type to avoid conflict. If something felt unfair, I'd just shrug it off. I didn't want trouble. But now I understood something deeper. Standing up for yourself isn't about fighting. It's about protecting what matters. It's about not letting fear or silence give power to the wrong people. A few months passed and life settled into a peaceful routine again. The HOA ran smoothly. The new board even started publishing every dollar they spent in monthly reports. People actually trusted them now. One morning I found a small card in my mailbox. It didn't have a return address, just a short note inside. It said, "I know we didn't see eye to eye before. I was wrong. I hope you can forgive me." There was no name, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was from. I didn't keep the card as a reminder of what happened. I kept it because it showed that even people who once stood on the wrong side could change. That was the real ending. Not revenge, but understanding. Later that same day, I went back down to the lake with my rod and tackle box. The air was warm, the sky a soft shade of orange as the sun dipped low.